thank you, Gohin, for already providing the disclaimer that my facts may be challenged. But I'm just a student, I'm a grad just like you guys, so bear with me. The narrative I'm trying to portray today is creating the Malay nation from the Malaccan myths to Singapore's surrender. So it's quite a very ambitious narrative I'm trying to portray. It spans 5 to 6 centuries, and I'm trying to just do it in 20 minutes, more or less. And it's quite a Malay heavy narrative, but just bear with me because I think it's really important for the understanding of the politics in the area. Okay. Wait, I need someone to control the slides.
Oh, yeah.
I can do it.
So as an introduction, of course, when we talk about the Malay nation, the starting focal point will always be, usually be, Malacca. So Malacca, in a sort of, should I turn off the lights? Yeah. So Malacca is solar polity. So the word solar polity, what it means is basically that, Southeast Asia before, in the first century, it consisted of small petty kingdoms. And so when, let's say, like in one particular area, there's 10 small kingdoms. And then when one of them, let's say the one in the middle, become really strong and stronger as time went on, so they become the central sun. So when this happened, the smaller kingdoms surrounding it will normally swear its allegiance to the central sun. And the moons, which are the smaller kingdoms, who swear their allegiance to the planet kings, will then swear their allegiance to the central sun. It's confusing, but the point here I'm trying to make is, when Malacca was at its peak, it was the central sun, and the lesser kingdoms were directly or indirectly in allegiance to it, to Malacca. And so, as time went on, the identity, the culture of the central sun, in this case Malacca, will radiate to the surrounding areas, and this is how cultures radiate. Stronger cultures will dominate weaker cultures. So, to give you a clear example, in the mainland area, mainland being Thailand, Vietnam, Burma, so from the 1st century up to 14th century, 25 small kingdoms ended up being converged into 3 units we now call Vietnam, Burma, and Thailand. So that is because the central sun was long enough that it could converge small kingdoms and spread its culture, and as time went on, homogeneity of culture happens, and that's how the whole area becomes homogenized. Next slide. So Malacca is obviously one of the small empires that received Islamization. So this is a clear characteristic. This is a clear, I'm trying to say Southeast Asian kingdoms have always been importing outside ideologies. Before Islam came, we adopted Indian culture. We were Indianized. We took a mixture of Hinduism and Mahayana Buddhism, and later on Theravada Buddhism. So, in short, the simple reason is because our ancient culture was not complex enough to develop philosophy, theory of governance. Like, for example, ancient Indian cosmology was described as you have Mount Meru at the middle, and the gods reside on top of Mount Meru. And you have the 4 continents, north, south, east, and west of Mount Meru, and water surrounding everything. So this idea was turned into a monarch system, where the king is the central point. King is Mount Meru, and all the surrounding areas is the area and the subject under the authority of the king. So the reason Islamization happened in this area, not as strongly as it was in the mainland area, but mostly here, is because nearing 15th century, maritime trade has emerged as a very, very strong aspect of the economy. So obviously there are much more maritime kingdoms here because there's more contact with water compared to the area in the mainland area. So during the 15th century, a lot of Arab traders and Gujarati traders from the part of India where a lot of Muslims are there. So a lot of these traders, they are very wealthy, and they came here. So being rulers of this small maritime kingdom, a good way to attract these traders is by adopting the same religion themselves. So a lot of kingdoms, a lot of rulers of these kingdoms converted to Islam. And besides that, when you trade, you have to travel, right? You have to like go to ships and you have to go from kingdoms to ports to ports. So the ancient beliefs could not fit that kind of activity, that kind of society, because ancient gods, ancient beliefs have fixed, gods are fixed with localities. Every different land has different spirits, has different gods. So you need one portable god, you need one universal god. And Islam can provide that, because obviously the Muslim god Allah is the universal god. So that's also another important aspect that Islamization occurred successfully in the archipelago of Southeast Asia. So 1511 is the date we fixed as the fall of Malacca, when the Portuguese came and took Malacca. So I put the word premature fall of Malacca there, because what was happening in the archipelago area is also happening in the mainland area, where small kingdoms converge to form bigger and stronger units, and as I mentioned before, Vietnam, Burma, and Thailand. That would have happened in Malacca and other archipelago area as well. Like, imagine a world where if the Portuguese never came, what were ancient Malacca would have survived to modern day and would have formed its own country. But of course that didn't happen when the Portuguese came. So when Malacca fell, the people of that area, Peninsula Malaya, parts of Sumatra, parts of Java, they lost their center of civilization, because prior to Malacca there's not a Malay Muslim kingdom that has reached such similar level of gloriness. So with the fall of Malacca, the glory of a Malay Muslim center of civilization in Southeast Asia was never repeated. So this created a problem. The crisis of identity. How do we preserve this Malaccan identity? Because as I mentioned before, the solar politics, right? So once the sun is gone, it's only a matter of time before another sun emerges. And the identity and the culture of that new central sun would reach the area. So the Malaccan identity would be replaced if maybe like a kingdom that emerged in southern Thailand becomes strong enough, and maybe all of us will be called Thai people now. I mean, these are possible scenarios. So there's a crisis of preserving Malaccan identity. So how do we do that when we have lost our center of civilization? So which leads me to the second part, mythical kerajaan. So as the center of civilization is missing, we need to develop ways to preserve its identity. And so we create the mythical past. This is an image of Sejarah Melayu by Tun Sri Lanang. So this mythical past that we created talk a lot about the greatness of Malacca. A lot of weird stuff, I'm telling you. There's like the story of the Sultan of Malacca, Sultan Mansur Shah, had a foreigner from Arabia who helped him to kill the king of Siam by firing an arrow from Malacca directly to Siam, and apparently the arrow reached the king of Siam and killed the Siamese king. And also, we developed ideas of rulers having divine powers. Sang Sapurba, apparently he's being told as the ancestor of the Srivijaya Malaccan dynasty, he's the ancestor of all these kings, was told to have descended from Raja Iskandar, translated as Alexander the Great. I don't know. I want to say it's true, but I don't know. And a lot of supernatural powers. Sultan Mansur Shah can cure the skin disease of the Chinese emperor by simmering his feet in a basin of water and making the emperor drink that water, the drink. Yeah, and a lot of other stuff too. So these myths, as weird as it was important because it preserves the Malaccan identity. It replaces the role of the Sultanate as center of civilization, center of culture, center of identity, and besides that, it also preserves the idea of the Malays being Muslims. So we attributed the idea of being Muslim to something supernatural as well. Example, Raja Merasidu, which would later a Pasai king. Pasai was one of the kingdoms on Sumatra. His conversion to Islam was told in a very supernatural, mystical way. He had a dream. Some sources say he was the Prophet himself. some say it's just a figure from Arabia, who came to him in a dream and told him to recite Arabic Quranic verses, and he couldn't. And this figure asked him to open his mouth and spat into the king's mouth. And when he woke up, he found himself miraculously able to recite the 30 verses of the Quran without any fault, and also miraculously circumcised. A rude awakening. So, and another, next slide. And another thing that the myths preserve is the Adat. So Adat right now, we look at it as something trivial mostly, at least I do. So it's like, we look at it as a local custom, how do we eat, how do we dress, stuff like that. But in truth, it preserves much more than that. It preserves one important thing. Clear relationship between the ruler and the subject. The story of Sang Sapuba, as mentioned before, the ancestor of all these Malay kings, and Demang Lebar Daud, the local chief in Sumatra, where he was told that they made a pact where this local chief promised that his descendants will forever be loyal to the descendants of Sang Sapuba. And Sang Sapuba said his descendants will always be just to the descendants of the local chief. So this created the mentality that the word we always use now is daulat and also dahaga. It created a sentiment of perpetual loyalty towards our rulers. And besides that, it created a connection to our mythical past. Since the myths has created a very, very mythical image of a golden past of Malacca, how great it was, how it was the center of civilization. So Adat is the only connection with that past. So you have to preserve that, because by observing it properly, then one day the mythical golden era will come again. Because that was how they did it back then, supposedly, as told in the myths. The strict observance of these Adats were the ones that were the things that made the kingdom successful. So if you abandon them, things will go downwards. And this wasn't exclusive to Southeast Asia. It was also in other parts of the world. Even the Roman kingdom also has the same kind of idea. When the Greek philosophers were trying to instill the art of rhetoric, the art of rhetoric, that's linguistically correct, right? The art of rhetoric. Okay, yeah. Trying to instill the values to the Roman people, the Roman rulers hated it because it violated the Roman values of courage and honor. So it was scared at abandonment of these values with another foreign value would create to the downfall of the Roman Empire. And thirdly, Adat also created a hierarchy protection of the ruling class. Because sovereignty, we have to understand it. Because right now, sovereignty lies with political boundaries of the state. And so we imagine that we are citizens of a sovereign country. But back then, there's no sovereign country. It's just sultans ruling a certain area, ruling a significant amount of subjects. And so, if you're a commoner, there's some things you can do, there's some things you cannot do. So this created an idea that you're fixed at where you are. So you are not allowed to challenge the social hierarchy. The kings are not to be touched and things like that. So the conclusion from this part is, with the absence of Malacca as the center of civilization of the Malay Muslims in the area, we need to preserve the identity in some ways, and that was done through the myths. And the myths, by mystifying, by creating a very mythical image of the past, instituted the kerajaan as the only institution that can preserve the identity, because the kingdom was no longer there. So sultanates, Raja, kerajaan, the word is derived from Raja. So Raja is the only institution that can preserve the identity. So that's what I'm trying to say is, to be Malay itself, you have to be part of the kerajaan, part of the kerajaan. Yeah. Because without the kerajaan, then we can just take some of the culture and yeah, that's my point. Going to the next slide. The third part is rise of the Bangsa. So what I'm trying to say just now is sovereignty lies with with each kerajaan. So you declare yourself as a subject of a certain ruler. You don't say you belong to the kingdom of, to negeri somewhere, because the idea of a negeri having sovereignty wasn't there. You're a subject of the Perak Sultan, you're a subject of the Johor Sultan, and that's how the idea of citizenship goes. There's no passports to say you're a citizen of Malaya or something like that. But so even in the Malay Peninsula, before the British, well, when the British were already there, but when the Sultans were also there, the idea that the Malays of each states are common is absent. There was no consciousness of a common people, although they dress the same, they speak the same, they have the same language, the same religion. It's the idea, the only political loyalty they have is towards their own rulers. And this also is an interesting point, because it means that everyone can be a subject of any ruler. If you're a European, you live in Kelantan, you live there for 10 years, you develop the same culture, language, dress code, then you're a Kelantanese, simple as that. So the idea of a rigid definition of a race, so to speak, was not there. Okay. Now we see the idea of the kerajaan as inheritors of the Malay identity challenged by the idea of the bangsa. So first, one of my favorite personalities in Malay history, Munshi Abdullah. So he's the, so to speak, the first liberal Malay, the first liberal Malay, that's the perfect description. He attacked this idea of kerajaan. He was a teacher in Malacca. He was of Arab and Indian origin. And he traveled to all states because he was a translator for a British official, so he traveled and he wrote accounts. And he saw the same thing all over the Malay states, the Malay kerajaans. They are weak, and all the Malays were backwards, simple as that. And he blamed the rulers for this. He said the Rajas were only concerned about their status and not for the welfare of their subjects. And he also questions the Adat. He said this Adat is not helping the Malay people, the subject of the Rajas, to develop, to be a modern society. They need new knowledge, they need European individualism and enlightenment, which the Adat doesn't help at all. This Munshi Abdullah's idea is clearly influenced by liberal ideas. This was 19th century. Europe had developed Darwinism, many and other, Adam Smith, a lot of liberal thinkers. One of them is Herbert Spencer. So Herbert Spencer was, he was labeled a social Darwinist, although he hated that label because he thinks Darwin should be labeled after him. But he basically divided the world into nations, into races, and divided the races into two, superior and inferior. So at this point of, this is a time of imperialism. So it was superior, the colonizers, the inferior, the colonized. So having the clear division of idea between superior and inferior races. So Munshi Abdullah look at the Malays as one race and look at them as inferior because they were under the rule of other people. So Munshi Abdullah wants reform of the bangsa, not the kerajaan. He attacked the kerajaan, he hated the kerajaan. He said the kerajaan can just go somewhere else, but the bangsa has to reform. Next is another Abdullah, 50 years later. Yunus Abdullah, this is early 20th century, 1906. That's when he came to prominence. He's more moderate than Munshi Abdullah, although he has the same ideas. I call him the softer Abdullah. So he was the first editor of Utusan Melayu, and believe me, Utusan Melayu in 1906 was considered a very liberal newspaper, believe it or not. So Yunus used Utusan Melayu to propagate this idea further, to reform the Malays. He said the function of Utusan is to make the Malays, to make the Bangsa Melayu understand modern issues and things around them, like other Bangsas in this modern era. And also, he included a lot of emotionalism. In contrast to Munshi Abdullah, he doesn't attack the Raja, the institution of monarchy. He included this sense of emotionalism, like a sense of love for the Bangsa, a sense of belonging, that you just have to help your people because you belong to the community, simple as that. And also, Yunus thinks